The hangman dropped his rope. When the prisoner started to pray for him, sand skittered across the scaffold planks, and the rope swung once like a finger drawing a circle in the air, and in that breath the hangman's hand rose, the crowd pressed forward, and the prisoner lifted his face and said softly, clearly, so everyone heard it the same way, "God spare the man holding the rope." The words cut the street sharper than any knife. Even the sheriff's "do it" landed dull beside them. The hangman blinked, fingers still on the knot, a thick-wristed man with soot in his pores and a job that paid in nightmares, and for the first time since he took the gallows contract, he felt like the air itself had weight. The clock outside the freight office ticked in hard little stabs, flies stitched heat around the faces closest to the platform. The deputy began the count because that's what order sounds like when hearts won't do it themselves. 10, he called, and sand hissed, and a woman somewhere breathed, "Mercy," and a child on a water barrel covered his own eyes. 9, the deputy said, and the sheriff shifted his boots an inch, because command sometimes needs movement to look like certainty. The hangman heard none of it because the prayer crawled into his hand and made a home inside the bones, and when he looked down into the hoodless face, he did not see an outlaw with a ledger of sins. He saw a man with a calm that wasn't bravado, a calm that said, "I am not yours to break." 8, the deputy called, and a banker coughed the word investors, and the blacksmith muttered, "Get on with it," and the saloon doors winked in and out on a gust of heat. The hangman tugged the rope to feel its truth and felt his own father's calluses instead, the memory of a winter barn and a horse cut loose so a starving neighbor could ride to town for medicine, and how the law then had called it theft, and his father had called it neighbor. 7, the deputy barked, and the prisoner spoke again, barely. "Forgive him his wages, Lord, and charge the debt to me." The hangman's mouth went dry, because that's not a plea a guilty man makes, that's an offering a free one does. The sheriff lifted his hand, trying to bridge duty and silence with a single gesture that would make the town feel held, and he found nothing to hold on to but his own doubt. Dust rose and hung like a veil. The hangman's fingers wouldn't close. His palm had learned levers and knots, not prayers in their terrible gentleness. 6, the deputy snapped, stumbling a little because the rhythm had slipped, and the crowd felt it, and a murmur went through the heat like a fish through a river. The hangman heard boots on the steps, slow, steady. Then the preacher's voice close to his elbow, not loud, not soft, just placed in the space where a man chooses. "If the rope drops," the preacher said, "you take him, Lord. If it doesn't, you take me." The hangman stared at the preacher's hands, both open, both empty. He looked at the sheriff. The sheriff didn't nod, didn't shake his head, just watched like a man at a threshold that might be a cliff. 5, the deputy said, and someone laughed the way fear laughs when it pretends to be mean. The prisoner's lips moved again, and this time the hangman understood the shape without hearing. "Bless the hands that bind me." Wind shifted. The rope turned its slow little circle. The platform creaked a sound that has visited too many towns. 4, the deputy called, and the hangman tasted iron and ash, and a childhood lesson nobody remembers when they need it. Mercy is heavier than oak. He saw the mayor near the back, jaw tight, pockets full of reasons. He saw the dead man's brother near the front, eyes like broken bottle, fingers twitching for the fall. He saw a girl with a scar at her hairline hold a plain tin ring in her fist like a relic from a war nobody crowded to see. 3, the deputy counted, voice cracking now, because the world was not obeying, and the sheriff finally spoke, tired and clean. "Get it done, Hank." The hangman did not move. The prisoner lifted his chin and said one more thing, and this time it carried with the wind as if the sky lent it throat. "Make him mine, Lord, because I am already yours." Something inside the hangman shifted like a beam finding a new angle that will hold the roof longer than the plan said it could. His thumb left the knot. His elbow refused the lever. His body made a decision his mind would have argued if it had been quicker. 2, the deputy tried, but the number died in his mouth because the hangman stepped back. Not much, just enough to say to the street and the badge and the grave, waiting like an open ledger, "No." The crowd breathed in one piece. The sheriff's hand froze in air. The prisoner closed his eyes like a man setting down a heavy bucket. The hangman whispered, only the prisoner and God close enough to hear it. "I won't buy my bread with your breath." And then the micro-thunder of hooves broke the pause. Two riders, fast, flanking the scaffold, one tossing a folded paper toward the sheriff, the other lifting a rifle skyward and firing once, not at men, but at the clock, shattering its glass so the count could not continue with a lie, shards falling bright as hail around the platform, while the town watched time itself break rather than watch a man do it. The echo of the rifle still hung in the air when the hangman dropped the lever. It struck the wood harmlessly. No body fell, no neck snapped, only the clock's shattered glass rained onto the boards like frozen tears. The prisoner opened his eyes. The crowd looked at one another as if the world had missed a beat and nobody knew the next note. "That's enough," the sheriff shouted, but his own voice carried more fear than command. Two riders were already on the platform. One, a federal messenger holding a seal-stamped pardon, the other, a weathered woman with a shawl wet with sweat and dust. She swung down, stumbled once, and clutched the rail. "He's not the one," she cried. "The real killer's in Stockton. My brother's confession's in that satchel." The messenger handed the paper to the sheriff. Wax broke. Words unfolded. Truth bled into the heat. The sheriff read aloud. The prisoner was innocent, freed by a signature that had galloped too slow. The hangman, Hank Dobbs, stood there with his head bowed, not from guilt, but from something stranger. He felt light, almost hollow. The rope dangled beside him, swaying like a living thing trying to understand mercy. The prisoner, Thomas Reed, took a single step forward, the noose brushing his shoulder. "You saved me," he said softly. Hank shook his head. "No. You prayed for me." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Take him down," he ordered, but no one moved because the law had already been broken and sanctified in the same breath. The crowd began to dissolve in murmurs. A boy clutched his mother's hand. The woman with the confession looked at Hank, tears streaking through the dust. "You did right, mister," she whispered. "World don't make it easy to stop killing." Hank loosened the rope from the beam, coiled it slowly, reverently. "Guess I'm out of work," he muttered. The sheriff exhaled. "You did what I couldn't." "Maybe," Hank said, "but I still have to live with what I almost did." The prisoner stepped closer. "Then let me pay that debt. You give me the rope, and I'll bury it." Hank stared at him, then handed it over. The crowd gasped as Thomas walked straight to the gallows post, dug a hole with his hands, and laid the rope inside. "This isn't for hanging," he said. "It's for remembering." The sheriff turned to Hank. "Come by my office later. You'll need protection. There'll be folks calling you coward by nightfall." Hank nodded but didn't answer. He was watching the woman ride away, the wind tugging at her shawl, thinking how a stranger's courage had rewritten the script of every sin he'd ever justified. Thomas Reed walked to him and held out his hand. "I owe you a life," he said. Hank shook his head. "Keep it. Just use it for something better than the law ever gave me." As the sun slid behind the church steeple, the last of the crowd scattered, leaving the scaffold creaking in the cooling wind. Hank untied his apron, folded it once, and laid it across the rail. He looked at the sheriff one last time. "If you ever hang another man, make sure the wind's blowing his name the right way." Then he stepped down, boots thudding on earth that suddenly felt alive again. Behind him, the prisoner knelt by the fresh mound and whispered a prayer not for himself, but for the man who had refused to kill him. In the distance, thunder rolled, soft, forgiving, like the sound of a town learning to breathe again. When dusk fell, Hank Dobbs left the gallows standing behind him like a confession carved in timber, the rope gone but the shape of it burned into the evening light. He walked until the town noise faded, until only the wind against the mesquite kept him company. The road stretched west toward a ridge where no one cared who had sinned for pay. A half-mile beyond the last fence, an old stable leaned beside a dry creek, once a rest stop for mail riders, now empty except for dust and the smell of horses long gone. He built a small fire and sat near it, hands trembling though the night was warm. Every time the fire cracked, he heard the lever slap wood and felt the ghost of a body drop that never did. He closed his eyes, but the prayer followed him. God spare the man holding the rope. It played again and again until he could not tell if it had been spoken aloud or invented by his guilt. The sky turned darker, the coals breathing red. Somewhere out there, a wolf cried, long and mournful, like a sound made for him alone. When footsteps approached, he thought it was the law or his own conscience dressed as one, but it was Thomas Reed, the man he hadn't hanged, walking through the moonlight carrying a saddlebag. Hank stood, startled. "I buried that rope," Thomas said softly. "Figured you come looking for it, so I brought you bread instead." He tossed a wrapped loaf onto the ground, fresh and warm. Hank stared. "You followed me." "Someone had to make sure Mercy didn't feel like exile," Thomas said. He sat opposite the fire, calm, the same peace that had undone a town's routine. "You can't stay in Dry Hollow," Hank warned. "They'll turn me into a coward's legend and you into a liar." Thomas smiled faintly. "Let them. Truth survives worse names." For a while they said nothing. The fire popped, throwing gold onto their faces, one lined by labor, the other by salvation neither asked for. Hank finally said, "I didn't stop the hanging because of faith. I stopped because my hands quit obeying me." "Then maybe God found a shortcut through your nerves," Thomas replied. Hank looked away, embarrassed by the comfort that almost sounded like blessing. "What'll you do now?" he asked. "Go east," Thomas said. "Find the woman who carried my pardon. She risked more than both of us." "And you?" he asked back. Hank poked the fire with a stick. "Find work that don't pay in nightmares." "There's no such work," Thomas said. "Only different ghosts." The wind changed direction, carrying the scent of rain. Hank stared into the darkness. "If I ride before dawn, they'll forget me by winter." "No," Thomas said quietly. "They'll remember you every time the rope swings and someone hesitates." Hank exhaled, slow and tired. "That's no mercy." "It's better than forgetting." The first drops hit the dust, hissing as they fell. Hank stood, adjusting his coat. "You keep the loaf. I'm not hungry." Thomas smiled. "I didn't bring it for hunger. I brought it so you'd remember it's still warm." Hank looked at the fire, then at the man he hadn't killed. "Maybe that's what scares me most." When he finally turned away, the rain grew heavier, blurring the firelight, washing tracks from the ground until only two shadows remained, one kneeling, one walking, both alive for reasons the law would never understand. By morning, Dry Hollow woke to silence that didn't feel natural. The gallows still stood in the square, empty and ashamed, and the paper the sheriff had nailed to it, a single word, "pardoned," flapped in the wind like a confession nobody wanted to read. In the saloon, men drank earlier than usual, speaking softer than whiskey liked. Sheriff Cole sat at the far table, hat low, badge tucked in his pocket, staring at the half-drunk coffee cooling beside his hand. The mayor entered first, boots loud, pride louder. "You lost this town its spine," he barked. "A hangman quits, an outlaw walks free, and you stand here like prayer fixed everything." Cole looked up slowly. "Prayer didn't fix anything," he said. "It just stopped us from breaking what wasn't ours to break." The mayor slammed a coin onto the counter. "You let weakness turn holy." Cole's eyes darkened. "No," he said. "We let hatred turn law." The room went still. Even the piano stopped mid-note, and the barkeep looked like he'd rather be sweeping graves. Outside, the church bell rang once. Nobody knew who pulled the rope. Across the street, a boy sold papers shouting, "Hangman gone mad, prisoner freed." Cole rose, heavy with a kind of exhaustion that lives behind the ribs. He walked out, hat tipping low against the sun. The blacksmith nodded at him, unsure if respect or pity fit better. Near the well, old Mrs. Calder caught his sleeve. "You did right," she whispered, "but right's got a slow reward in this town." Cole managed a tired smile. "Then maybe we can wait for it." Down the road, at the edge of town, Hank Dobbs stood beside his mule. Staring at the bakery window, someone had written "coward" in flour dust across the glass. He wiped it away with his sleeve, then saw Thomas crossing the street toward him. "You can leave," Hank said. "They'll forget you faster than they'll forgive me." Thomas shook his head. "They can't forgive what they won't face. That's not your cross." Hank looked back at the scaffold, sunlight breaking through the slats like judgment turned to mercy. "Feels like it anyway." Thomas put a hand on his shoulder. "Then carry it till it teaches you what mercy really costs." "And what's that?" Hank asked. "Everything you thought was strength," Thomas said. The wind caught dust and light together, spinning them through the air like ashes from an old fire. Cole approached, his boots slow, eyes softer than they'd been in years. "Town's splitting in two," he said quietly. "Half calling you hero, half calling you heretic." Hank smiled without humor. "Maybe that means I finally balanced something." Cole looked at Thomas. "You heading east?" "Eventually," Thomas said. "But first I'll build a place where a man can pray without chains on either end." Cole nodded. "Then this town's not your last stop. It's your first mercy." They stood together, three men tied by a morning that had rewritten their names in dust and forgiveness. For the first time, nobody reached for a weapon or a Bible. They just stood there, letting the silence breathe them in. When Hank finally turned toward the horizon, the town behind him didn't look smaller. It looked cleaner, like the sun had decided to stay. 2 days later, a rider came from the east with dust in her hair and a pistol on her hip, her eyes sharp enough to slice through a lie. The woman wore a dark coat, federal cut, badge pinned to her lapel but not shining. U.S. Marshal Anna Graves, the kind who carried justice like a curse instead of a job. She stopped at the gallows, read the paper still nailed there, and spat into the dust. "Pardoned," she muttered. "By who?" When she reached the sheriff's office, Cole was at his desk, rewriting a report he didn't believe in. She dropped her glove on the counter. "You hanged nobody, freed a prisoner, and broke federal order," she said. "Explain it." Cole met her gaze, calm but unshaken. "The order came late. Then your duty was to wait." "A man's life ain't paperwork," he said. "Depends who signs it," she replied. She opened her satchel and pulled out another paper, this one, blood-stained, folded twice, stamped by Fort Hamilton. "Thomas Reed's pardon was real. But there's a second name on it. Hank Dobbs. Says he's wanted for desertion and unlawful mercy during wartime." Cole frowned. "Mercy's a crime now?" "Always has been," she said. "It just depends on who's keeping score." The wind pushed through the doorway, rattling the blinds. Cole leaned forward. "You come to take him?" "That's my order." "You'll need more than paper for that," he said. By dusk, word had spread. Another law had come hunting. Hank sat by the river sharpening a knife he didn't plan to use, watching the sky drown in copper light. He heard hooves and didn't turn. "You'll find supper cold," he said. Anna dismounted slow, cautious. "You know me?" "I know your kind," he said. "Law that rides in after mercy and calls it treason." She studied him, trying to reconcile the quiet man before her with the outlaw file in her satchel. "You disobeyed a direct command to hang a man. The government calls that mutiny." "Then I mutinied against hell itself," he said. "And hell's bad at writing reports." She pulled her gun but didn't raise it. "You won't get a trial." "Didn't expect one." "Then why not run?" He looked up, the sunset turning his eyes to amber. "Because running's what I did every time I obeyed." For a moment, neither spoke. The water moved slow between them, carrying light like a prayer that hadn't chosen a side. Anna holstered her gun and sat on a rock opposite him. "I lost a brother at Gettysburg," she said quietly. "He followed orders till they killed him." "Sometimes I wonder if disobedience might have saved him." Hank met her gaze. "Maybe that's why you came, not to arrest me, just to see if a man can live after choosing mercy over command." She said nothing. Her silence agreed too loudly. Night fell hard. Coyotes called from the ridge, and the stars came out like witnesses who'd seen worse. "You'll stay the night," Hank said finally, "safer near the fire." "I'm not afraid," she replied. "Then you're the only one," he said, feeding the flames. The smell of smoke and river water filled the air. Anna took off her coat, revealing the cross stitched into her vest. "You still believe in forgiveness?" she asked. Hank poked the fire. "I stopped believing in it, started practicing it instead." She looked at him through the firelight, the law in her heart fighting the woman in her bones. "You're still under warrant," she said at last. "Then write your report," he answered. "Just don't lie about the kind of crime it was." The flames swayed between them, red and steady, and for the first time since she'd ridden west, Anna Graves lowered her badge beside her gun and let both rest in the dirt. By dawn the fire was low and the river thin as ribbon glass. Hank woke first, stirred the coals, and poured what little coffee he had left into 2 cups. Anna blinked against the smoke, hair loose, eyes not yet armored by duty. "You could have killed me in my sleep," she said. Hank shrugged. "Would have been easier to hang myself with your badge." She smirked, but the truth in it cut clean. They sat in silence, the smell of ash and rain mixing with the distant cry of crows. "You really believe what you did was mercy?" she asked. "Belief's for men who need permission," he said. "I just chose not to forget what human looks like." She watched him for a long moment, the lines around his eyes carved deeper by wind than regret. "My report won't survive my conscience," she admitted. "Then write another," he said. "One that tells the truth." "Truth don't pay," she murmured. "Neither does sleep when you lie for a living." He stood, rolling his bedroll tight. "You got a choice now, Marshal. Arrest me and keep your badge clean, or burn that warrant and let it mean something." She took the folded paper from her coat, the wax seal already cracked by travel. "This says you disobeyed an order during the war, that you refused to execute prisoners at Sweetwater Camp." Hank looked up at her slowly. "I did. They were boys, half dead already. Killing them wouldn't have ended the war, just me." "They shot your captain for that," she said quietly. "And I dug his grave." Her hand trembled. "You could have run then." "I did," he said. "And it took me 10 years to stop." The wind picked up, scattering the ashes between them. Anna stared at the paper, the ink beginning to blur from the damp. "They'll come looking for me if I don't bring you in." "Then let them come," he said, "but don't let them find you carrying another man's guilt." She knelt beside the fire pit, tore the warrant once, then again, and dropped it into the flames. The paper curled black, the ink hissing away like a snake retreating to its hole. "You just made yourself a traitor," Hank said softly. "Feels lighter than being loyal," she replied. The fire crackled, catching her face in a glow that turned her eyes the same color as dawn. "What'll you do now?" he asked. "Ride south," she said. "There's a border town that hires lawmen who lost their faith. You'll fit right in." "And you?" she asked. "I'll find the man who signed that pardon. I owe him a truth." She reached into her saddlebag and handed him a small, worn book, the prisoner's prayer journal. "He wrote this the night before you spared him." Hank opened it, saw only one line inside. "God, forgive the hand that holds the rope, for it trembles like mine." His throat closed. He closed the book carefully, holding it as if it were still alive. Anna stood, brushing dust from her coat. "If anyone asks, I never found you." "If anyone asks," he said, "tell them you did, and that I wasn't worth hanging twice." She smiled, mounted her horse, and paused. "You know, Hank, sometimes mercy travels faster than guilt." "Not in this country," he said. "Maybe you're just walking it." She touched her hat, turned her horse, and rode east into the rising light. Hank watched until she vanished behind the ridge, then looked down at the dying fire where the last piece of paper collapsed into ash. "Guess that makes 2 of us pardoned," he whispered. The sun had climbed halfway when Hank reached the ridge overlooking Dry Hollow again, the same town that had once paid him to kill and now whispered his name like a ghost story. He carried the journal tucked inside his coat, the edges worn smooth by the miles. The wind brought up the smell of mesquite and smoke. The gallows still stood, its shadow long and crooked like the memory of a sin that wouldn't die. Below, a crowd gathered again, smaller this time, but meaner. Someone had painted across the scaffold in red dust, "Coward's Monument." He guided his mule down the slope, hat low, every hoofstep a sermon on consequences. The sheriff saw him first, stepping from his porch. "You shouldn't have come back," Cole said. Hank dismounted slowly. "I had to. They'll hang you proper this time. Maybe that's the only way to finish the prayer." The crowd began to stir, faces sharp, hunger for blame thick in the air. The banker pointed. "That's him, the man who turned justice into mercy." Hank faced them, voice steady. "If mercy's treason, then we all deserve the rope." A murmur rose. A woman shouted, "You shamed this town." He nodded once. "Then let it remember shame before it remembers pride." The sheriff stepped closer. "You want to die for them?" "No," Hank said. "I want them to live with what they almost did." He took the journal from his coat, lifted it high. "The man you wanted dead wrote this the night before the hanging. He prayed for me, not for himself. He prayed for this town too. So if you need someone to hate..." Hate the man who taught me how to stop obeying evil." He handed the book to Cole, whose hands shook as he read aloud the single line. "Forgive the hand that holds the rope." The words hit the crowd like rain on dust, soft at first, then heavy. Silence followed, deep and strange, broken only by the creak of the gallows. A child near the front whispered, "Mama, is he bad?" The woman hesitated before answering. "No, just different." The banker turned away, muttering something no one caught. The sheriff looked up at Hank. "You can't stay." "Didn't plan to," Hank said. "Just came to bury the rest of it." He climbed the scaffold, untied the last length of rope still hanging there, coiled it neat, and set it on the platform beside a loaf of bread he'd carried since the river, hard now, but still whole. "If anyone forgets what mercy costs," he said, "feed them this before you feed them hate." He stepped down and walked through the crowd that parted in uneasy silence. No one spat, no one cheered, no one reached for a gun. When he reached the edge of town, Cole called after him. "Where are you heading?" Hank paused. "Where the wind don't ask questions." Then he kept walking. The gallows stood quiet behind him, the bread catching sunlight like gold, the town caught somewhere between judgment and repentance, not sure yet which side of the rope it wanted to live on. That night, lightning rolled across the plains like God dragging a lantern through the dark. Hank had made camp 2 miles out when the first drops hit, steady and cold, soaking the journal through his coat. He turned back, unwilling but driven, because something about unfinished mercy always pulled him toward its grave. When he reached Dry Hollow again, the town looked smaller, its lamps dimmed to nervous glows. The church stood on the hill, doors open though no one prayed inside. The sheriff waited by the steps, hat in hand, eyes hollow. "You came back again," he said. "Thought you'd had your fill of ghosts." Hank nodded at the open doorway. Town's still choking on one. Inside, the preacher knelt before the altar, head bowed. A lantern flickered beside a coil of rope laid neatly across the steps, its fibers dark with oil to keep it from fraying. "They brought it here," Cole whispered. "Said a symbol like that shouldn't rot in the square, but they don't know if they want to burn it or bless it." Hank walked forward, boots echoing in the hollow space. "Neither," he said. "They should bury it where no one can dig it up again." The preacher looked up, tears carving clean lines through the dust on his cheeks. "You think burying shame makes it holy?" "No," Hank said, "but leaving it on display makes it worship." The thunder cracked, rattling the windows. "Then you do it," the preacher said, pushing the rope toward him. "If mercy belongs to you, finish it." Hank stared at the coil, the same rope that had once waited for his hands to deliver death. "Mercy doesn't belong to anyone," he said softly. "That's why it works." He picked it up, heavy as memory, and walked back out into the rain. The sheriff followed him down the hill, water running off their coats like confession. Behind them, the bell began to ring on its own, wind or something holier. Hank dug a hole in the soaked earth beside the old well, where the town first drew its water generations ago. "This is where it ends," he said. "No scaffold, no gallows, no sermons, just dirt." Cole looked at him, voice shaking. "They won't understand." "They don't have to," Hank replied. "They just have to drink from the same ground." He laid the rope in, the thunder masking the sound of it hitting bottom. Lightning flashed, and for a moment it looked like a vein of gold sinking into the earth. Hank covered it, one handful at a time, until the rope was gone. Cole knelt beside him, mud on his hands. "You think this changes anything?" Hank looked toward the town. "No, but maybe it reminds them they still can." The rain fell harder, washing the mound smooth. "What'll you do now?" Cole asked. Hank straightened, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Right east," he said. "There's a marshal with a burned warrant who'll need someone to stand between her and the law she broke." Cole smiled, the first honest one in years. "Tell her the town's breathing again." Hank adjusted his hat. "Then maybe we all will." He mounted his mule, turned toward the rising storm, and rode away. Behind him, the church bell tolled once more, softer this time, not for death, but for a mercy the wind was finally ready to carry. The storm chased him east for 2 days, rain carving rivers through the plains until the road disappeared beneath gray water. When the sky finally cracked open to light again, Hank saw smoke rising from a ravine ahead, thin, curling, deliberate. He followed it and found Anna Graves sitting beneath a stripped cottonwood, hat off, rifle across her knees, staring at a burned letter curling in the fire. She didn't look up when she said, "Figured you'd follow the lightning, not the trail." Hank dismounted, every motion deliberate, the way men move when they've outlived their purpose. "You were right about mercy," she said. "It doesn't stop storms, just makes you stand in them longer." He smiled faintly. "Still better than sleeping through thunder." She glanced at him then, face pale from sleeplessness, badge gone from her coat. "They sent riders after me," she said I was protecting a deserter. "You burned the warrant and the orders that made it." Hank tossed her a loaf of bread from his saddlebag, the same one that had sat on the gallows rail. She broke it in half, handed one piece back. "For the road," she said. They ate in silence, fire snapping between them. After a long while, Anna said, "You know, when I joined the marshals, I thought I'd save people from evil. Turns out most days I just escort it to court." Hank poked the coals, watching sparks leap and die. "Maybe saving's not about taking people from evil," he said. "Maybe it's about standing between them and the worst part of themselves." "That's a preacher's line," she said. "Heard it from a hangman," he replied. She laughed softly for the first time, the sound cutting through the emptiness. "You going somewhere?" "South," he said. "Border towns need men who know when not to pull a trigger." "And when to?" "When mercy's run out." She stood, brushing dust from her coat, and looked at the horizon. "We could ride together till the river splits." "You'd trust a man with my past." "I burned it," she said. He looked at her a long time before nodding. They saddled up, rode side by side into the drenched prairie where puddles mirrored the clouds. Wind pushed at their coats like hands trying to turn them back, but neither slowed. By dusk, the sky broke into color, red, gold, and violet, the kind of beauty that arrives only after destruction. They stopped at a ridge, water shining below like molten glass. "You ever think the West can be redeemed?" she asked quietly. Hank tilted his hat back. "Not the land," he said. "Just the people stubborn enough to keep planting mercy in its dirt." The last of the storm rolled east, and the stars came out one by one, shy at first, then brave. Anna pointed to one low on the horizon. "That one's yours," she said. "Hangmen don't get stars." "Maybe not," she said, "but they can still find their way by them." He smiled. "Then lead on, Marshal." They rode until the night swallowed the sound of hooves, two silhouettes fading into a world that had finally learned to let go of its rope. By the time the sun rose again, the storm had washed the plains clean. Hank and Anna rode until the ground grew dry beneath them, and the air carried the scent of dust instead of rain. They stopped at a ridge where the land fell wide and endless, 1,000 miles of silence stretching between mercy and memory. Below them, a river glimmered like steel and gold, cutting the horizon into two halves that could never quite meet. Hank looked east, his coat torn, his hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much to close again. Anna dismounted and stood beside him, her rifle slung low, hair catching the light like smoke that refused to burn away. "What now?" she asked. "Now," he said. "We ride until mercy doesn't need a name." She smiled faintly. "That might take forever." "Then we'll start with mourning," he said. She knelt beside the river and filled her canteen. "Do you ever think about the ones you did hang?" she asked. "Every night," he said. "They come quiet now, though, not angry. Just waiting for me to finish the prayer." She nodded, her face soft with understanding only the fallen can share. "You think God forgives the ones who hold the rope?" "If he doesn't," Hank said, "then the whole world's hanging." The wind rose, gentle this time, brushing through the grass like an unseen hand smoothing out wrinkles in time. Anna took the half-loaf from her saddlebag, broke it once more, and handed him a piece. "For the road," she said. "You keep it," he replied. "You'll need it more than I will." "You planning to leave?" "I already did," he said, and when she turned, he was walking toward the river, boots sinking into the mud like he was finally learning to stand. She watched him wade in until the water reached his knees, his reflection bending with the current. He dropped the last piece of bread into the flow, and it drifted away, carried west toward a town that had once called him Hangman and now would have to call him something else. The sun climbed higher, burning the mist away, turning the river into a road of light. Anna mounted her horse, watching him disappear beyond the bend, his silhouette framed in gold. For a long time she didn't move. Then she whispered, "Ride easy, Hank," and turned south, the wind carrying both their names in opposite directions. Back in Dry Hollow, children played near the well where the rope was buried, their laughter bright and careless. One asked the preacher what lay beneath the dirt. He smiled and said, "Nothing dangerous anymore, just a prayer someone forgot to finish." The bell above the church tolled once at sunset, low and steady, and the echo carried far enough that Hank heard it wherever mercy had led him. That's how the West remembered him, not for what he did, but for what he refused to do. Do you think a man can ever outrun the sins he refused to commit? If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to Redemption West for more tales of faith, fire, and forgiveness across the old frontier.